Good morning, everybody. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, participants to this webinar on the preparations for the upcoming 28th meeting of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice of the Convention on Biological Diversity. My name is Sakile Selichena, and I am the Director of Science, Societies, and Sustainable Futures at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I also serve as Secretary of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice. Welcome to the second webinar on the preparations for SBSTTA-28. Before we go into the content, I would like to introduce my colleagues to you who will be presenting this webinar, who will be presenting the information on the different agenda items. So I would like to introduce you to Gillian Campbell. Many of you will already know her. So she's been leading the process of the preparation of the global report, the global review. And this morning she will be presenting information on item 3A, which is the global report, but also item 3B on the indicators. And so, good morning, Gillian. And in addition to Gillian, I'd like to introduce you to our colleague Vincent, who is responsible for agenda item 4 on the outcomes and on IPBES. So, without taking any much more of your time, I will just go directly into the content of the webinar. So, those of you, well, you probably all have received the notification. You will be aware that there is a series of preparatory webinars for SBSTTA-28 and SBI-7. SBSTTA-28 takes place from the 27th of July until the 1st of August, and SBI starts on the 4th of August up until the 12th of August. This is part of a series of webinars. The first webinar was held on the 25th of June, which presented agenda items 5, 6, 7, and 8 of SBSTTA-28. And today we are hosting two webinars on agenda items 3A, 3B, and 4. There are two webinars. One is taking place right now, 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Montreal time, and the second one will take place today as well at 4 p.m. Montreal time. It is exactly the same webinar with exactly the same content, so there's no need to tune in twice unless you enjoy seeing our faces and hearing our voices. And so the upcoming webinars are the two webinars on SBI, following the same modality, two webinars on the same day, just the same content. And the final webinar will be on the 21st of July on the functional review and the draft budget. So next slide, please. So today's agenda is we're going to start with agenda item 3A, which is the global review and the presentation of the global report, followed by the monitoring framework, presentation item 3B, and then finally agenda item 4 on matters relating to IPBES. We will hope to have some time for question and answers, and then we will close. I'll say it now, but I'll probably say it again. The chat function has been disabled. So during the Q&A, you will be requested to put your questions in the Q&A box. You don't have to wait until the end of the webinar to put your questions. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will take them all at once at the end of the presentations. Next slide, please. So just a few things to note. This is a technical webinar. We are presenting only technical information. We aim to provide you with a little bit of background for the preparation of each item, a little bit of an overview of the technical information that's contained, and a brief glance at the draft recommendations. This is not a negotiation session, and we will not be able to answer any political questions, any negotiation type questions. We're just presenting to you what is contained in each document and draft recommendations. Next slide, please. And so with that introduction, I'm very pleased to hand you over to Jillian, who will make the presentation on agenda items 3A and 3B. Over to you, Jillian.
Thank you. So I will present 3A first. So technically my colleague Kieran is leading on 3B at the upcoming SBSTTA, but he's on leave today. So this presentation was actually prepared by him, the part on 3B. That said, in terms of the mandate for the 3A, the COP15 in decision 15.6 decided to conduct a global review at COP17 and COP19. So this would be the midterm and the final review of the framework. And then decision 1632 established the concrete procedures for the global review. So these are the primary basis for the work that we've done on the global report, which is very much detailed in decision 1632, and the way that this item is structured. So in terms of what the pre-session document contains, which the pre-session document went up last night. So it is currently online and you will be able to see it only in English, but it is in the process of being translated. I would like to note that in decision 1632, there was a timeline for the work on the global review. And based on that timeline, it was not possible to prepare the document earlier, but the timeline was adopted by the COP. So the COP was the one that actually decided that this document was going to be prepared towards the end of June. So in terms of what the pre-session document contains, it is a joint pre-session document for SBSTTA and SBI, because SBSTTA is responsible for preparing the scientific, technical, and technological inputs for the global review, and SBI has the overall mandate for the global review. So to try to make this clear, we have one pre-session document for both SBSTTA and SBI. So at the top of the document, you'll see that it has a symbol for both meetings. And therefore, you have just one summary of the work that's been done so far, the key messages in the global report, or the concise summary of the global report is included as an annex to this document. And there's an update on the planning, monitoring, review, and reporting more generally. It also mentions the Kunming dialogue, which will be held in September. And I would mention, for those of you who are interested and have not registered for that meeting, the nomination period for participating will expire on the 7th of July. So it would be good if you could send your nominations in soon. And then this document includes two things: a draft recommendation for SBSTTA and a draft recommendation for SBI. So you can see in this document both what is going to go to SBSTTA and what is going to go to SBI. The part that is going to go to SBSTTA, I'll get into that in a minute, but it also includes two addendum. One addendum is the global report itself. So the global report was out for peer review up until the 29th of June, and the Secretariat, with guidance from the hashtag, are preparing a revision of that document based on that peer review. So again, this is part of the timeline that was adopted in the decision 1632. But what this means is that there will be a revision of this global report, which will be publicized. We're aiming for the 18th of July. And so you would have that, and this will go up as add1.rev1, and we will then also have an information document explaining the changes so that you are able to understand what was changed on the basis of the peer review. The peer review, you can see all the comments on the page for the notification, which is 2026/47. So if you go to that notification, you can see all the peer review comments that have been received. We received a few thousand comments, so there will be changes, of course, to this global report. Now, the second addendum is on the monitoring framework, which is also item 3B. So I'll talk more about this later, but the reason why the monitoring framework discussion is an addendum to the global review is that the national reports and the global report are largely based on the indicators from the monitoring framework. This was how the system is designed. And so in addition to reviewing how parties have made progress, as we've been going through the national reports, we have reviewed the use of the indicators and the challenges that parties are expressing in their national reports on those indicators. And so these two items are very closely linked, and this is why there's one recommendation across all of item 3. And so the monitoring framework does not have its own recommendation. It's presented as an addendum, which I'll talk more about in a minute, and within the overarching recommendation on item 3. So next slide, what does this recommendation for SBSTTA include? So it includes an endorsement of the global report. The global report, as I mentioned, will be produced as a rev. The timeline states that the global review will be edited and translated after SBI. Because of the length of the document, translation and editing will take some time, and so it's not possible to have this done ahead of the meeting. And again, this was agreed in the timeline that's in decision 1632, so it's not that this was a decision of the Secretariat, it's that the COP itself recognized that the translation would only be able to happen after. However, we are planning to translate the concise summary, which is basically an executive summary for the report. So that will be available in all languages for the parties ahead of SBSTTA. So the draft recommendation, as mentioned, includes an endorsement of the global report. It also pulls out some of the findings from the global report, which are mostly noting that progress has been made, but that there are challenges and gaps in progress towards the implementation of the framework. And then it invites parties and others to take the findings of the report into account in their work. So then that relates mostly to the global report itself. Then SBSTTA is also responsible for providing these scientific, technical, and technological inputs to the global review. And so SBSTTA has the task of identifying actions to address the data and information gaps that are in the global report. And so there's a section in the global report on these gaps, and there's a corresponding section in the draft recommendation or the elements of the draft decision that would go to COP on addressing these gaps. In addition to that, this is where the monitoring framework comes in, because in order to address the data and information gaps that are noted in the global report, one of the main ways that this would be done is through operationalization of the monitoring framework. And so that's the place where those recommendations related to the monitoring framework come in. And I'll mention this in a little bit more detail. And then there's some requests to the Executive Secretary related to making the findings of the national reports and the global reports. It just says global report on the slide, but it is related to making the national report and the global reports more accessible. And then, of course, there's some recommendations related to the monitoring framework as well, which I'll talk more about in a second. So the relationship with SBI, SBI has the overall mandate for guiding the global review. If you look in decision 1632, there's a section on the governance of the global review, and it has said again that SBI has the overall mandate, but SBSTTA has a mandate related to the governance of the global report and providing the scientific, technical, and technological advice. So these elements related to endorsing the report and the elements related to addressing the scientific, technical, and technological gaps, which are mainly around data and information, will also be coming from SBSTTA. These are positioned in the draft recommendation as elements of a draft decision, and then those elements of the draft decision would be incorporated into the SBI recommendation, and then that would go forward as a draft decision for COP. It is the intention that whatever is negotiated at SBSTTA will only be negotiated at SBSTTA, and those elements that are negotiated there of this draft decision would then just pass through SBI on the way to COP. So that concludes item 3A. So on item 3B, there are a number of documents that were requested in Decision 1631 on how we should improve the monitoring framework. And so Decision 15.5 is the decision where the monitoring framework was adopted, and then Decision 1631 provided technical updates to the monitoring framework and also made a number of recommendations and some requests for future work. And so there's three types of things that were requested in Decision 1631. One is an analysis of the use of indicators in the national reports. As I mentioned, this is very much tied to the global report, and this analysis in addition to the global report, which does include a lot of mentioning of the use of indicators, but there will be a separate information document that should go up very soon on the use of indicators in the national reports. It also requested work related to further development, review and updating of the monitoring framework and the metadata. A revised metadata, which includes mostly minor technical updates and additional information in order to add clarity, are also provided in an information document. And in a number of cases, the decision requested additional work on specific indicators. This has been brought into the metadata, and a call for additional component and complementary indicators was made, and there's a list of potential component and complementary indicators that could be added to the monitoring framework. So this is what's included in this second information document. And then, of course, there was also a request to share information on the monitoring framework and support its use, and this is described in this addendum document. So in terms of what the pre-session document contains, I've sort of already said most of this, but it does include this update related to the work of the Secretariat and of partners, the updates to the metadata, and possible updates to the indicators, including a revised list or additions to the component and the complementary indicators. And I would mention that because of the national reporting deadline being in February, although there has been a review of the use of indicators, which will be shared in terms of really trying to understand what does this mean for the next round of reporting, the document doesn't go quite so far. And so this is something that I think will need to be worked on over time. So as mentioned, the draft recommendation is included in the main document on the global review. However, it also does, specifically on the monitoring framework, it is proposing some detailed technical work, including to really review in more detail how the indicators were used, what are the gaps, and what needs to happen in terms of future operationalization of the monitoring framework. There is a proposal for an ATAG to support further work on the monitoring framework, as there are so many different technical tasks related to how to improve this before the 8th round of national reporting, that that this is why this proposal has been made. Obviously, this is up for negotiation. And there's also a request for the subsidiary body on Article 8J to provide additional guidance on the traditional knowledge indicators and how these could be better reflected in the monitoring framework. This is something that has come through and was also discussed at 8J itself. So that is the conclusion of the presentation on item 3. Back to you, Sekile.
Thank you, Jillian, for that detailed presentation. We will move on now to a presentation by Vincent on matters relating to IPBES. Over to you, Vincent.
Thank you, Sekile. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. So I will present you the item 4 of the SBSTTA-28, and so I will present you the document which is already online, document SBSTTA-28/3. So next slide, please, Julian. So this item is on the matters related to the work program of IPBES. As you may know, COP has requested SBSTA to consider all the outputs of IPBES when these outputs have been adopted by the plenary of the platform. At SBSTA-27, SBSTA already considered 2 assessments, the Nexus assessment and the Transformative Change assessment. These 2 assessments were adopted by IPBES at the 11th plenary. And so the 12th plenary of IPBES in Manchester last February adopted the summary for policymakers of the business and biodiversity assessment. The real title is Methodological Assessment of the Impact and Dependence of Business on Biodiversity and Nature's Contribution to People. So, as requested by COP, SBSTA-28 will consider the outputs of these assessments along with some other considerations. Next slide, please. So, in the presentation document that you already can access on the SBSTA website, you will have different chapters. First, you will have an overview of the recently adopted deliverables of IPBES during the 12th plenary. So we will talk about the business and biodiversity assessment, but we will also have, you will also see a summary of other decisions and other decisions adopted by the plenary of IPBES. This document also contains a review of the summary for policymakers of the business and biodiversity assessment, and also some considerations about the implication of this assessment for the work under the convention. You will also find a summary of the collaboration between IPBES Secretariat and the Secretariat of the CBD. And at the end of this document, you will see some draft recommendations based on all these chapters and all these contents of the document. Next slide, please. So the summary of key findings of the summary for policymakers of the business of biodiversity assessment. This is a very short summary, of course. You can find the summary for policymakers of this assessment as a reference document for SBSTA. So on the SBSTA-28 website, you can find this SPM, but you can also find it on the IPBES website. So this assessment is, of course, particularly relevant to the global target 15, but more generally, it also addresses the role of business, finance sector, finance actors in safeguarding biodiversity and in driving its loss. You will also find some really interesting things about the role of business disclosure, transparency, and accountability in supporting the implementation of the KMGBF and the monitoring of its results. You will also find in this SPM some potential actions to act for biodiversity, and including actions for businesses that they can take to assess their impacts and dependencies on biodiversity and ecosystem services. You will also find some ways for business to assess their risk and impact on biodiversity, and you will also find some really interesting things about the knowledge gaps identified by the authors of this assessment and how to fill these gaps. Next slide, please. So again, you can look at the recommendations in document SBSTTA-28/3 to summarize the draft recommendations contained in this document. First, Substack would encourage parties to use the findings of the assessment in general, but more particularly to provide or enhance what is called in the assessment enabling environments for sustainable business practices. But also parties could identify and address the knowledge gaps identified and strengthen the engagement and the collaboration with business and financial sectors for all these actions. Substack could also encourage business and financial actors to measure and manage their impacts and dependency on biodiversity, of course. And at the end, we will at the end of these draft recommendations, Substack will also invite IPBES more generally to implement the recommendations from the midterm review that has been conducted on the work of the platform. This is one of the decisions from the 12th plenary of IPBES. A midterm review of the work of the platform has been conducted, and this review contains several recommendations. In particular, some recommendations are to increase the policy relevance of IPBES assessments and to strengthen collaboration between IPBES and other organizations, and in particular between IPBES and the convention. And so we propose Substack to recommend to invite IPBES to implement this particular recommendation and to increase and strengthen the collaboration between IPBES and the convention. Next slide, please. So that's all for this item. Of course, if you have any question, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you, Vincent. Okay, so dear everybody, all participants, we have come to the end of the presentations for this webinar. So we will just quickly go into the Q&A. So far, we have received several questions. So the questions that we have received, as you will see, they are all relating to when the documents will be available. So we have several questions about when will we have the documents needed to prepare for item 3. Julian mentioned the documents have been posted, but they're currently not online. So there's a question about when will the draft recommendations be posted online. So as Julian mentioned, because of the COP prescribed timelines for preparation of these documents, of the global review and the global report, the peer review of the draft global report closed 3 days ago. And so the Secretariat staff has been working really hard to incorporate many of those comments and to finalize the main pre-session document. The main pre-session document has been finalized and will be posted very shortly. It is with our editing team who are dealing with, in addition to all the SBSTA documents, the SBI documents and documents for COP, but they have promised us that for COP and COP-MOP, but they have promised us that the document in English will be online shortly, and then the translations will come online as they're available. And then there's a question about when the information documents on the metadata update and on the proposed component indicators will be online. Those hopefully will be online by the end of the day today. Okay, so I see We have a question on how many submissions were received for the global report review. Jillian?
I'm going to check the numbers right now. So you can view all of the submissions yourself if you go to the page for the notification. So if you go to, it's cbd.int /notifications /2026 hyphen 047. That's the notification. And what we have is there were 29 from parties that were received. And then there were another 66 from different organizations and observers. So that's the number of submissions. Overall, I can give you the count, but there was a few thousand rows then of comments. Our plan will be to, when we issue the revised document, we will be sharing an Excel compilation of all the comments and how these were addressed in the document as part of the annex to the INF document. This will be a very long document, but this will provide transparency on how the comments were addressed.
Yes, thank you, Jillian. So, dear participants, dear colleagues, you can see that the workload for the Secretariat for the preparation of that report was really heavy, and we congratulate the team for working really fast to try to turn around not only the pre-session document, but the revised global report. So we will be posting shortly the link to the submissions page, as Jillian has just mentioned. We'll be dropping that shortly in the Q&A box. And also just to respond directly to the question about how many submissions, again, we received 29 parties and 66 organizations. But then altogether, there's over 1,000 comments from those 29 parties and 66 organizations. There is a question. Did you say the ad hoc technical expert group on target 7 will be discussed at SBSTTA-28? We were previously told it will be open for discussion only at COP17. Jillian?
I am not aware of an tag on target 7. I believe that they might be mentioning the work that FAO has been doing on the pesticide indicator. There will be an information document that covers that item if that is what they're mentioning.
Yeah.
But again,
Yes.
this is work by FAO, not by us. I should just to clarify.
Yeah, there will be a couple of information documents posted relating to the work on that. So on I believe it's indicators relating to target 7, but there is no RTAG plan for target 7. Regarding 3A, the draft global review notes that an INF doc with further details of the methods used for the global will be published.
So this one is also at the final stages. It should be very, very soon.
We received a question. Could we clarify if the terms of reference of the RTAG will be discussed at SBSTTA-28? And this was...
So this is part of the draft recommendation. So therefore, yes, this would be exactly what would be discussed. So as you are probably aware, if something is part of a draft recommendation, then that forms the basis for the discussion at SBSTA.
Okay, We don't seem to have any additional questions, and so we will wrap up the webinar. Just inviting anybody, if they have any final questions, to drop them in the Q&A box now so that we may answer them for you. And if not, we will thank you and we will close the webinar. Okay. We have